Luke Marston began his morning the same way he did every day, long before the sun fully rose over the desert. He lived alone on a quiet ranch far from town where only the soft wind and the sound of his horses usually kept him company. He liked the silence, the calm, and the slow rhythm of the land. Most people thought a life like his would be lonely, but Luke never complained. He enjoyed simple things, like checking the fences, watching the sky change colors at dawn, and taking care of his animals. On this particular morning, something felt a little different. He could not explain it, but he sensed a strange stillness in the air, as if the desert was watching him. Even his old horse lifted its head and sniffed the breeze in a cautious way. Luke ignored the feeling at first and continued riding toward the far edge of his land. Following the fence line like he always did, the sun was barely rising, creating a soft, golden light that touched the tops of the trees. As he rode closer to a large cottonwood tree near the border of Apache land, he noticed something unusual. At first, it looked like fabric, or maybe a blanket caught in the branches. The shape moved slightly with the breeze, but it didn't match anything he expected to see so high off the ground. Luke slowed his horse, narrowed his eyes, and leaned forward to look closer. His heartbeat changed in an instant. It wasn't fabric, it was a person. Luke stopped, his horse so quickly that dust gathered around its feet. He stared in disbelief as he realized a young woman was tied up in the tree. She was placed high on a thick branch, her arms secured in a way that kept her from falling but left her helpless and afraid. Her dark hair flowed loosely in the morning wind, and her clothing showed she belonged to the Apache tribe. Luke felt the breath leave his chest. He had seen many odd things while living on the border of two world settlers on one side, Apache people on the other, but he had never seen anything like this. Fear and worry rushed through him as he climbed down from his horse. He kept his movements slow so he wouldn't startle her, but she saw him right away. Her eyes opened wide with fear. Luke raised his hands gently, trying to show he meant no harm. "It's okay," he said softly. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm going to help you, all right." But the young woman, whose name he didn't yet know, pulled back slightly. She didn't speak. Her breathing was quick, almost frightened. Luke understood why. If someone had put her there, she would have no reason to trust a cowboy appearing out of nowhere. She had probably prepared herself for the worst the moment she saw him. He moved closer to the tree slowly, making sure she saw every step he took. "You're safe now," he said again, his voice calm as morning water. "I just want to help you down." He studied the tree and realized he would need to climb. The branches were thick but steady. Luke placed his hand on the trunk and tested it before pulling himself upward. The woman watched him the whole time, unsure what his intentions were. Luke could feel her fear, but he kept climbing calmly, speaking every few moments so she wouldn't think he was silent by choice. When he reached her branch, he could see her face more clearly. She was young, maybe in her early 20s, with delicate features and strong eyes that still held courage despite everything. She looked exhausted, but she was awake and aware. Luke smiled softly at her, hoping to ease her fear. "I know you don't trust me yet," he whispered, "but I'm going to cut this rope and carry you down. I'll be careful." She didn't reply, but he saw confusion mixed with doubt in her eyes. She didn't look angry, she looked scared of hoping for kindness. Luke took out his pocket knife and carefully moved toward the rope. He made sure to keep one arm steady around her so she wouldn't fall once the rope loosened. When he finally cut it, her weight shifted toward him, and he held her tightly so she stayed safe. She stiffened in surprise, unused to being held by a stranger. But he didn't let her slip or lose her balance. The climb down was slow but steady. Luke took each step as if he were carrying something precious. When his boots finally touched the ground, he gently helped her stand, but she nearly stumbled. Her legs were weak, unsteady from being stuck up there for so long. Luke caught her before she could fall and held her lightly by the shoulders. "It's all right," he said softly. "You're safe now." She pulled back a little, still unsure of him. Luke didn't blame her. She had probably expected someone dangerous, not someone trying to help. He stepped aside slightly to give her space, but stayed close enough to steady her if she needed it. She tried to speak, but only a dry whisper came out. It became clear she needed water, warmth, and rest. Without hesitating, Luke gently guided her toward his horse. "I have a cabin nearby," he said. "Let me take you there. You need care." She hesitated, but her body was too weak to walk far. Luke helped her onto the horse slowly, making sure she was comfortable and stable before he climbed up behind her. He wrapped one arm around her lightly to keep her steady, but he kept as much respectful distance as he could so she wouldn't feel uncomfortable. The ride back to the cabin was quiet. She didn't speak, and Luke didn't pressure her. He knew trust took time, especially after something frightening. When they arrived at his cabin, Luke carried her inside gently. He placed her near the warm fire and brought her a blanket, water, and a bowl of warm broth. She watched him cautiously, unsure why he was being so careful and kind. Luke didn't ask questions. He didn't demand explanations. He only focused on helping her feel safe. He cleaned the dust from her hands and offered her water in small sips so she wouldn't choke. She slowly relaxed, though she still kept a watchful eye on him. After a while, she gathered enough strength to speak. Her voice was soft, barely above a whisper. "Why? Why did you help me?" Luke looked at her with surprised confusion, as if the answer was obvious. "Because you needed help," he said gently. "And because no one deserves to be left alone like that." She listened carefully to his tone and studied his expression. For the first time, he saw a tiny flicker of trust in her eyes. She lowered her gaze, holding the cup with both hands, as if she was unsure how to react to unexpected kindness. Luke didn't press her for more. Instead, he sat a short distance away, giving her space while staying close enough to help if she needed anything. He checked the fire, then checked on her again. Each time he spoke softly, making sure she understood that she had nothing to fear from him. Hours passed, and as she rested, Luke thought about the strange sight he had encountered. Someone must have placed her in that tree, but he didn't know why. Whoever did it had wanted to frighten her, maybe frighten her whole tribe, but no matter who they were. Luke knew one thing. Clearly, he couldn't let them hurt her again. As the day faded and evening approached, she finally whispered her name, Nahia. Luke repeated it gently, making sure he said it right. She looked surprised he showed so much respect for her name, but she nodded softly. Nahia still didn't explain what happened to her, but she didn't need to, not yet. Luke understood that her silence came from fear and exhaustion, not from unwillingness to share. He decided he would wait patiently until she felt safe enough to speak. For now, his only goal was simple: make sure she felt protected. And for the first time since she had opened her eyes in that tree, Nahia began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she truly was safe. Nahia woke slowly the next morning, her eyes opening to the soft crackle of a fire and the warm sunlight shining through the small cabin window. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Her body tensed, expecting rough hands or harsh voices. But instead, she heard nothing except the quiet sounds of a man working outside. The gentle thud of boots on the ground and the soft nickering of horses. She sat up carefully, still feeling sore and weak. The blanket Luke had placed over her was warm, and the room smelled faintly of cedar and coffee. When the door opened, she watched Luke step inside. He carried a tin cup of warm water and a small plate of food. He paused when he saw she was awake, giving her a gentle smile that wasn't forced or uncomfortable. "Good morning," he said softly. "I thought you might be hungry." Nahia lowered her eyes, unsure how to respond. She accepted the water with slow hands, taking small sips as Luke set the food beside her. He didn't sit too close or stare at her. He simply moved around the room, tending to the fire and making sure she remained comfortable. After a few minutes of silence, Luke sat on a wooden chair a little distance away and said, "You don't have to talk about anything if you don't want to. I just want you to know you're safe here." Nahia looked at him carefully. She had grown up hearing many stories about cowboys, some fair and some cruel. But nothing had prepared her for a man like Luke, who spoke gently, acted without fear, and offered help without expecting anything in return. She wondered why he was different from the others she had seen or heard about. She opened her mouth to speak but hesitated. Luke noticed her struggle and gave her time. He didn't interrupt or push her. Instead, he waited with the patience of someone who understood wounds that were not visible. Finally, Nahia whispered, "I saw something I should not have seen." Luke leaned forward slightly, not out of pressure, but out of concern. He kept his voice low. "Did someone hurt you because of that?" She nodded slowly. She explained how she had been collecting herbs near her tribe's land when she heard voices. It's not from her people, but from a group of men she didn't recognize. Curious and cautious, she had hidden behind tall brush and watched them move cattle that didn't belong to them. They were planning to take the stolen animals farther into the hills and blame the Apache for it. Hoping to start fights between the settlers and the tribe, Nahia's voice trembled as she spoke, but she kept going. She had tried to slip away before they noticed her, but a branch had snapped under her foot. One of the men had turned, spotted her, and grabbed her before she could run. They had tied her and hung her in the cowboy tree, saying the Apache would think a cowboy did it. They wanted trouble, and she had become the easy target of their plan. Luke listened quietly, his jaw tightening, but his voice staying soft. "I'm sorry you went through that," he said. "No one deserves that fear." Nahia studied him again, and she noticed something new. He wasn't angry at her tribe, not like some settlers were. He was angry at the unfairness of what had been done to her. She took a slow breath and said, "I thought you were part of them when I saw you." Luke nodded gently. "I understand. If I were in your place, I'd think the same." He kept his eyes kind and steady. "I'm glad you let me help." She held her cup tightly, unsure what to say. No cowboy had ever spoken to her this way, not with calm respect, not with patience. Luke stood and began preparing fresh bandages for her wrists. The marks were faint now, but still tender. As he wrapped them, he spoke softly. "Those men, you recognize any of them?" Nahia shook her head. "Strangers." Luke nodded thoughtfully. "Then they're likely drifters. Trouble follows men who don't belong anywhere." He stood up and put away the cloth. "I'll make sure they don't come this way again." She frowned, confused. "Why would you risk yourself?" Luke sat back down and looked at her honestly. "Because this happened near my land. Because someone tried to use my land to start a fight. And because you didn't deserve any of it." For the first time, Nahia's eyes softened. She looked at him not with fear or confusion, but with the beginning of trust. She hadn't expected a cowboy to carry such a sense of fairness. As the day went on, Nahia grew stronger. Luke checked his horses, chopped wood, and cooked simple meals while making sure she rested. She observed everything silently. She noticed how he spoke to his animals with gentle words, how he fixed things with quiet patience, how he kept checking the door and the windows to ensure no one approached the cabin. Each small action told her more about his nature than any long speech could. She realized he wasn't helping her to feel important or heroic. He helped her because it was simply who he was. Later in the afternoon, Luke returned to the cabin carrying a small wooden box. He opened it on the table, showing herbs and salves he had learned to use over the years. "These might help you heal faster," he said. "I know a little, but you can tell me if I'm doing it wrong." She was surprised. Most settlers didn't value Apache remedies or knowledge, but Luke didn't act superior. He watched her carefully, and when she pointed out a salve she recognized, he nodded and applied it exactly as she guided him. As he worked, Nahia finally asked, "Have you always lived alone?" Luke sat back and gave a small smile. "Most of my life, yes. My folks passed on years ago. It's just me and the land now." She studied his face. There was honesty in his words, not sadness, just acceptance. "You don't feel lonely?" He shrugged lightly. "Sometimes. But I've got work to do every day, and the quiet doesn't bother me." After a pause, he added, "I'm glad I rode toward that tree yesterday. If I hadn't, you might still be there." The simple truth of that made Nahia's chest tighten. She looked down at her hands, remembering the hopelessness she had felt before seeing him. She whispered, "I thought I would not survive." Luke's voice was gentle. "You're strong." You held on. The fire flickered softly, warming the room. Nahia felt safer than she had in days. She realized she wasn't afraid of Luke anymore. Instead, she was grateful beyond words. But gratitude wasn't enough to hide her worry. What if those men return? She asked quietly. Luke considered this. If they're nearby, they'll look for sign tracks, movement, anything. I'll check the land and make sure they stay far from here. He paused thoughtfully. I won't let them find you. His voice carried a quiet certainty that made her feel protected in a way she had never expected. Nahea watched him as he put on his hat and prepared to step outside. She spoke before he reached the door. Be careful. Luke stopped and looked back at her, touched by the concern in her voice. He nodded with a warm, reassuring expression. I will. He walked out into the late afternoon light, and Nahea moved closer to the window to watch him from a distance. She saw the way he walked, alert but calm, like a man who knew the land and respected it. As he disappeared from sight, she felt something new trust beginning to settle into her heart. Luke spent hours checking the land. He found tracks, fresh ones. More than one pair of boots had walked near the border. The men who had harmed Nahea had returned, and they were searching. But Luke didn't panic. He returned to the cabin once the sky began to darken, keeping his steps quiet. When he entered the room, Nahea looked up with worry in her eyes. Luke closed the door behind him gently and said, They're close, but they don't know you're here. She swallowed hard, her voice barely steady. Will they come again? They might, Luke admitted honestly, but I won't let them near you. She stared at him for a long moment. There was no fear in his voice, only determination. She felt a strange warmth in her chest, not fear, not nerves, but something deeper. Something she hadn't felt since before the incident. For the first time since meeting him, she whispered, Thank you, Luke. He nodded gently, tipping his hat just slightly. You're welcome, Nahai. And in that quiet cabin, under the soft glow of firelight, a fragile but powerful bond formed between a cowboy and an Apache woman, one built not on fear or suspicion, but on simple, steady kindness. The night grew colder, and the fire inside the cabin burned softly, giving the room a gentle glow. Nahea stayed awake longer than she expected, listening carefully for any sound outside. Every crack of a branch or whisper of wind made her tense, but Luke's calm presence helped her stay steady. He sat near the door, cleaning his old rifle in silence. He wasn't doing it to scare her or show strength. He did it like a man preparing for something he hoped he would never have to face. When he noticed her watching him, Luke gave a small smile. You don't have to worry, he said quietly. I won't let trouble come through that door. She nodded slowly, folding her blanket closer around her shoulders. Even though fear still lived inside her, there was something comforting in the way Luke spoke. He didn't make big promises. He didn't pretend to be a hero. Everything he said felt honest, like he meant every word and would stand by it. After some time, Luke told her to rest, and he promised he would keep watch. Nahea hesitated, but her tired body finally gave in. She drifted off to sleep. The next morning, Luke woke before the sun. He stepped outside quietly, not wanting to disturb her. The air was cold and crisp, carrying the scent of pine. He moved around the cabin slowly, checking for tracks near the porch. The ground showed signs of movement-light impressions of boots. They were new, not more than a few hours old. The same men had come close during the night. Luke felt a tightness in his chest. He knew they were searching. They hadn't given up. They wanted to find the Apache woman who had seen their crime. They didn't care whose land they stepped on. He looked toward the window where Nahea still slept peacefully. He knew he had to tell her the truth, even if it worried her. She deserved honesty, not false comfort. When he walked back inside, Nahea woke instantly, sensing something had changed. She sat up quickly, her eyes alert. Luke hung his hat by the door and said in a gentle but serious voice, They were here last night. Not close to the cabin, but close enough that we need to be careful. Her breath caught, and fear flickered across her face. Do they know I'm here? No, Luke said calmly. They don't, but they're searching. Nahia's hands trembled slightly. She had escaped them once, but the thought of being found again made her heart race. Luke noticed her fear, and he moved to sit on the wooden stool across from her. He didn't reach out to touch her or try to force comfort. He simply spoke softly. I'm going to keep you safe. You don't need to face them again. Nahea looked into his eyes, searching for doubt. She found none. His courage was quiet but strong, like the land he lived on. After breakfast, Luke explained his plan. There's a small storage shed behind the barn. It's old, but I fixed it up years ago. It's sturdy, and no one would think to look inside. If trouble comes, I'll hide you there. She didn't like the idea of hiding, but she understood the danger. Will you be safe? She asked softly. Luke gave a small smile. I've dealt with worse than a few troublemakers. But Nahea didn't look convinced. She could see the worry he was trying to hide. She could also see how determined he was. He wasn't doing this for himself, he was doing it for her. Later that day, Luke showed her the shed. It looked old from the outside, just a simple wooden structure with weathered boards. But inside it was surprisingly secure. The walls were reinforced, and the floor didn't creak. There was even a small lantern hanging from a beam and a blanket, folded neatly in the corner. Nahea looked at him with quiet surprise. You made this strong. Luke nodded. I used it for storing tools years ago, but it became a safe place during storms. She ran her fingers lightly along the wooden wall. The shed felt safe in a way she didn't expect. I will trust your plan, she said softly. Luke nodded with a grateful expression. Good, but I hope we won't have to use it. She lifted her eyes to him and whispered, I hope so too. As the day passed, Luke continued checking the land. He spotted more tracks, 3 sets now. The men were moving through the area, circling like wolves, searching for something they had lost. Luke knew they were getting closer. When the sun began to set, he returned to the cabin. Nahea met his gaze immediately. She didn't need to ask. She could see from his face that things were getting more serious. They'll come soon, Luke said quietly. Maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow. But it's only a matter of time. Nahea took a breath. She remembered the fear she felt when she had been taken, the helplessness of being tied high in that tree. But she also remembered the moment Luke climbed up and saved her. His calm hands, his steady voice. That memory helped her stay brave. Luke prepared the cabin for the night. He closed the shutters, checked the door, and placed his lantern by the window. He didn't make a big show of it. He wasn't trying to frighten her. He was simply preparing like a man who knew danger was coming, but refused to run from it. After everything was ready, Luke sat down by the fire. Nahea sat nearby. For a while, they said nothing. The silence between them felt peaceful, not heavy. Finally, Nahea asked, Why do these men want to hurt me so much? Luke sighed softly. Because you saw the truth. People like them don't care who gets hurt as long as they protect themselves. She lowered her gaze. But this is not my land. I do not belong here. Doesn't matter, Luke said gently. What matters is that you're a person who deserves safety and respect. She stared at him, surprised by the simple honesty of his words. It reminded her of something her grandmother once told her, that sometimes kindness comes from unexpected places. The fire crackled softly. For a moment the world felt peaceful again. But the peace didn't last long. Late that night, just as the moon rose high in the sky, Luke heard horses approaching. The sound was faint, but clear. He stood up instantly, his eyes sharp and alert. Nahea felt her heart pound as she watched him move to the window. They're here, Luke whispered. Everything happened quietly, but quickly. Luke guided Nahea to the back door and escorted her to the shed without making a sound. She moved carefully, trusting him with every step. When they reached the shed, Luke lifted the lantern inside and whispered, Stay here. No matter what happens, stay hidden. Nahea grabbed his hand before he could leave. Her voice trembled. Please, be careful, Luke nodded, his expression warm despite the danger. Trust me, he stepped out, closed the shed door gently, and walked back toward the cabin. Moments later, 3 riders approached the ranch. They stopped near the porch, their silhouettes dark against the moonlight. Luke stood on the steps, calm and steady, as if he had been expecting them. One of the men called out, trying to sound casual. Evening, cowboy. We're looking for someone. Luke didn't flinch. I haven't seen anyone. The man leaned forward in his saddle. You sure? She's an Apache woman. Young might have come this way.
Ow.
Luke's voice stayed cool and even. I ride my land every morning. If I'd seen someone, I'd know." The men exchanged glances. They didn't believe him. The leader stepped off his horse, pretending to be friendly. "Mind if we take a look around?" Luke blocked his path with a slow, deliberate step. "Yes," he said plainly. "I do." Silence spread across the yard. The men realized they wouldn't push him easily. One of them muttered, "You're protecting someone." Luke's eyes didn't move. "I'm protecting my land." For a long moment, no one moved. The desert wind blew gently through the branches overhead. The men stared at Luke, trying to read him, trying to break his confidence. But Luke stood like a rooted tree still, strong, unshaken. Finally, the leader scoffed and stepped back. "We'll be back," he warned. Luke didn't respond. The men rode away into the darkness. But Luke knew this wasn't the end. Inside the shed, Nahia waited in silence. Her hands pressed to her chest, her heart racing. She had heard everything, and she knew one thing deeply. Luke had risked everything for her. The night felt heavier after the riders left, as if the desert itself was holding its breath. Luke waited on the porch until their shapes disappeared completely into the darkness. Only when he was certain they were gone did he walk quietly toward the shed. He tapped gently on the wooden door, giving Nahia a familiar signal so she wouldn't be frightened. After a short moment, she opened it slowly, her eyes filled with worry. Luke gave a small, steady smile. "They're gone for now." She could hear the tension in his voice, the quiet truth he wasn't hiding. They were gone, yes, but they would return. They weren't the kind of men who let things go icily. Nahia stepped out of the shed, her blanket still wrapped around her shoulders. The cold night air brushed her face, but her attention stayed focused on Luke. She looked at him carefully, noticing the calm strength he showed. As if danger didn't scare him, only the idea of her being unsafe did. "Did they hurt you?" she asked softly. Luke shook his head. "No, but they're not done. They'll come back again. They're getting desperate." She lowered her eyes, guilt filling her heart. "This trouble is because of me." Luke stepped closer, his voice quiet but firm. "No, this trouble is because of them. You didn't do anything wrong. Don't blame yourself." His words were gentle, but they carried the weight of someone who truly meant what he said. Nahia met his gaze again, and something inside her settled. He didn't protect her out of obligation. He protected her because he cared about fairness, about decency, about her. Luke guided her back to the cabin, helping her inside before she could feel the cold too deeply. The fire was still glowing softly, giving the room a warm, comforting light. Nahia sat near it, letting her hands warm as Luke closed the door behind them. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, it was thoughtful. Both of them were thinking about what would happen next. Finally, Luke said, "We can't stay here long. At dawn, I'll take you back to your tribe." Nahia looked surprised. "Is it safe to travel?" Luke nodded slowly. "Safer than staying here another night? Your people are the only ones who can protect you fully, and they need to know what those men are planning." Nahia's expression softened with understanding, but her heart felt heavier than before. She didn't want to bring danger to Luke's land, and a quiet part of her didn't want to leave him not yet. She had grown to trust him more than she trusted most people. He had shown her kindness without asking for anything in return. In a world where fear and suspicion often separated their two communities, Luke had become a rare bridge. But she knew he was right. "Will you be safe after I go?" she asked in a low, uncertain voice. Luke took a breath before answering, "I'll be fine. I know these lands better than they do. They won't win." She watched him carefully. He spoke with calm confidence, but she could see behind the words. He wasn't afraid for himself. He was afraid they might return while she was still there. She whispered, "I do not want you to face danger for me." Luke kneeled beside her, resting one hand lightly on the floor to keep himself steady. "Nahia, listen. Helping you wasn't a choice. It was the right thing to do. And I don't regret a single moment of it." Her eyes softened, and her breath trembled. She had never met a man who spoke with such sincerity. Luke noticed her exhaustion, so he encouraged her to rest before dawn arrived. "Try to sleep. We leave early." His voice was gentle, but firm enough to show he meant it. Nahia lay down near the fire, wrapped in the blanket he had given her. She closed her eyes, but didn't fall asleep immediately. Instead, her mind replayed everything from the moment she was taken, to being tied in that tree, to opening her eyes and seeing Luke for the first time. Fear had filled her heart then. Now, that memory felt different. It was no longer tied to terror. It had been replaced by the quiet image of him climbing toward her with gentle hands and calm words. Sleep finally reached her, carrying her into a peaceful rest she hadn't felt in many days. Luke didn't sleep at all. He sat near the window, watching the night sky slowly lighten behind the horizon. When the first hint of dawn touched the mountains, he stood, stretched his tired muscles, and quietly prepared a small bag for Nahi food, water, a blanket. He saddled his horse and checked the surroundings one last time. When Nahi awoke, the world outside was tinted with soft gold. Luke helped her to the horse, guiding her carefully, making sure she felt secure. She settled into the saddle while he climbed up behind her so she wouldn't fall. His arm rested gently around her, not holding her too tightly, but steady enough to make her feel safe. The journey across the land was quiet, peaceful even. The morning air was cool, and the desert looked calm, untouched by the danger that had followed them the night before. Nahia could feel Luke's quiet strength behind her. She leaned slightly into his support, not from weakness, but from trust. When they reached the border of Apache land, Nahia guided him along familiar paths. After some time, they finally approached her village. As soon as her people spotted her, they rushed forward with surprise and relief. The chief, an older man with wise, steady eyes, stepped forward. His expression tightened when he saw Luke. Ow! But Nahia quickly lifted her hand. "He saved me," she said clearly. The chief looked at her, then at Luke. He studied the cowboy carefully, searching for deception, pride, or disrespect. But he found none. Luke sat quietly, respectful, his hat held in his hands. His eyes lowered to show he meant no threat. The chief walked closer, stopping just a few steps away from him. For a moment neither spoke. Then the chief nodded slowly, meaningfully. "You helped one of ours," he said in a calm voice. Luke nodded respectfully. "I did what anyone should have done." The chief's eyes softened slightly. Not many would have. Nahia's people brought her to a healer's tent. But before she left, she turned back and walked toward Luke. Her steps were slow, and her eyes shone with gratitude. She stopped in front of him and spoke softly, so only he could hear. "When I feared the worst, you were the one who showed me kindness. I will never forget that." Luke felt a warmth in his chest, something gentle and unexpected. He tipped his hat slightly. "Take care, Nahia. You're safe now." But she shook her head lightly. "I am safe because of you." For a moment, they stood together in a quiet silence that felt deeper than words. Nahia wanted to say something about how he changed her view of the world. Something about how courage didn't always come from warriors, but sometimes from gentle souls who lived alone in the desert. But she knew words would fail to express everything, so she simply placed her hand over her heart, a silent gesture of respect and gratitude. Luke returned the gesture with a small nod when he finally turned his horse back toward his ranch. Nahia watched him until he disappeared into the horizon. She felt a soft ache in her chestnut pain, but something like hope mixed with sorrow. She knew their worlds were different, their paths separate, but she also knew one truth she would carry forever. Luke Marston was the reason she survived. Luke Marston was the man who chose kindness over fear. Luke Marston was the cowboy who changed her life in the most unexpected way. Back at his ranch, Luke returned to his quiet routine. The troublemakers never came back. They realized the area was too risky, especially with the Apache tribe alert and watchful. Life on the land felt peaceful again. But nothing inside Luke was quite the same. When he looked at the tree where he had found Nahia, he felt a mixture of sadness and gratitude. The memory was painful, but it led to something meaningful and unexpected connection. A bridge between two distant worlds, and a bond formed without either of them planning it. And though they lived far apart, Luke and Nahia carried each other's memory like a quiet flame, soft, steady, and unforgettable.